And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to TPM Day 1. I'm Steve Ferreria, CEO of Ocean Audit here live at Long Beach, and I'm so excited to talk to my next guest today. It's going to be Lars Jensen, the CEO of Vespucci Maritime. Lars has over 170,000 followers on LinkedIn, and you can move over. Warren Buffett, the oracle of container shipping, is in the house today. And we have a lot to talk about, Lars, of course. We're talking about Iranian conflict, rates, contracts. We're talking about geopolitical uncertainty, a shooting war, Red Sea disruption, Iran, escalation, Strait of Hormuz, risk, carrier rerouting. So why don't we start there? Lars Jensen, welcome to TPM.
Thank you so much for
It's
having
great
me
to
again.
see you.
Absolutely.
This has become our little annual tradition,
It's
hasn't it?
definitely a tradition. Looking forward to it every year.
It's so fun. It's so fun. And I know you're power packed with, the movers and shakers of TPM. And this year more than ever, it almost feels like Lars and I are on CNN or Fox News breaking the news, especially with all the geopolitical instability. And I just cannot imagine, how it was today with you wandering through the halls. Not even wandering, but I bet you didn't get 4 meters away from people.
No, but this is why I'm here, to meet with people, to talk with people. The one thing that was, no, annoying is not the right word, but through a curveball, I arrived Friday evening, looking forward to having a quiet Saturday morning, getting settled in.
I know.
And then everything went belly up in the Middle East, and it was not a quiet Saturday morning.
I know. And that's, as I told you, it was just shocking what occurred, and it actually changed my whole formulation of what we were going to talk about today to include that. And I think it's really important that we start off there, if you may, if I
Certainly.
may. So, I think that, Lars is referring obviously to the Iran and the shooting war that we have coming into play right now. And Lars, when you consider the Iranian crisis, the Strait of Hormuz, the Red Sea, now we've had the Red Sea disruption, and you've always reported on that. We're up to like day 734, and now we're almost like day 1 again. We have a real shooting war. The Strait of Hormuz's instability. Are we entering into a dual kind of era checkpoint for global trade? What's your take on the latest events?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see where things are going, so let's break it down into a few different components. We have the Red Sea. The Red Sea, up until 3 days ago, was actually on a path towards normalization. We had CMA that had gone through with services for the better part of a year.
Sure.
We had then Maersk starting one service, then Maersk and Hapag doing another service that was actually going through the Red Sea over the last 3-4 weeks.
Right.
Then this happens, and not only do we see Maersk and Hapag pull back, we actually have now also seen CMA CGM pull back. So the Red Sea is now back to the situation we saw not a few weeks ago, but more than a year ago. That's where we are on the Red Sea. So any hope of normalization anytime soon has gone completely out the window. So that's the Red Sea part. Then, of course, we have the whole part with Iran and over around the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. The reality right now is that the Iranians have said, well, the strait is closed, we're going to shoot at everybody. And it's clear they are serious. I mean, just before we met up here, I was checking up on it again. We're now at a point where they have already shot at 4 ships in the Strait of Hormuz within the last 48 hours. So they're absolutely dead serious when they say we're going to shoot at everybody. It also means that virtually all ships are at a standstill, either trapped inside the Persian Gulf or at anchor outside, unable to get in. That goes for all vessel types. This is, let's say, a more firm closure than what we have seen over in the Red Sea. Also because in the Red Sea, we have the last 2 years seen there's plenty of small regional niche carriers that go up, and because the Houthis are not shooting at them. So that's been pretty steady business. These ones have right now also dropped anchor because Iran right now is just shooting at anybody. So this traps part of the fleet inside the Persian Gulf. It traps some of the fleet waiting to get in. But this is only the beginning. If we become wildly optimistic, let's assume this is resolved tomorrow, then this becomes a blip on the radar.
Okay.
But if this drags on more than just a couple of days more, here's the problem. You got a lot of vessels that are inbound towards the Persian Gulf. They can't get in there. So the next step is, and we saw that also when the Red Sea crisis erupted, carriers will then offload this cargo in nearby ports.
Okay.
So that will be ports in Salalah in Oman. It will be up in Khor Fakkan. It will be Colombo over in Sri Lanka. And if we think all the way back to the early parts of the Red Sea crisis, we even saw congestion erupt in Singapore.
Right.
So this is the next thing that's going to happen. If this lasts more than a few days more, you're going to get congestion in these major hubs. Congestion, as we've learned the last 6 years, means capacity off the table, rapidly rising freight rates. So that is the next step. The carriers are planning for it already within Well, that was yesterday. You already saw some carriers introduce $3,000 emergency surcharges into the Gulf.
When were the surcharges effective?
Now,
immediately.
But what we have then seen within the last few hours today, you are then beginning to see carriers introduce emergency fuel surcharges. You have seen one of the examples I have here from the last 2 hours. MSC was announcing increasing freight rates from Asia to North Europe. They already announced an increase, I think it was 4 or 5 days ago. That one now went out the window, and they increased it by another $800. Now, Asia to North Europe obviously does not go through the Strait of Hormuz, and it goes around Africa, has done so for a couple of years.
Right.
But it's this clear indication that when we get massive disruptions, that immediately leads to capacity problems, and carriers will increase rates, and they will increase them rapidly. We are already seeing that today.
What carriers have announced? I mean, you mentioned CMA, MSC. Has Maersk announced as well?
I haven't got the full overview right now because things are moving rapidly.
Yeah.
But I would strongly suspect that when we wake up tomorrow morning, you have seen various types of surcharges and increases from all the carriers.
On a scale of 1 to 10 for the, as we stand right now in the seriousness of this crisis, where do you rank this?
Well, if we say the pandemic was a 10, the Red Sea would then be, let's call it a 5. This one would also be somewhere in the 4 to 6 range.
Really? And how do you see this impacting?
Maybe as a caveat for container shipping.
Right.
The wild card here is how is this going to impact energy flows, oil and gas, where the Strait of Hormuz is, of course, enormously important. It's 20% of the world's oil moves through there. And I am not an expert on tankers, so I can't really speak to what it will do to tankers, but we already saw today how much oil prices skyrocketed. That's going to have global ramifications in terms of increasing oil prices, increasing fuel prices. Over here, going into the U.S. political reality, increasing inflation because of rapidly rising energy prices.
Lars, which market gets hit worse by this crisis? I mean, does the U.S. market get a little bit of relief because, of obviously the flows to the West Coast? Which market's going to get hit the worst?
They're all going to be hit, but it's going to be a sequence. Obviously, right now, it's the market itself into the Middle East. Then, because it's a congestion effect in the ports and terminals, Asia, Europe comes next. Then your Pacific trade is going to be the last domino to fall, but that will be the sequence. That
what might we be looking at time-wise with regards to, say, the Pacific being impacted?
If this situation in the Hormuz simply continues, then you're going to look at an impact on the Pacific within the next month as well.
Right. I remember we talked last time about this Cape of Good Hope and the rerouting, right? And I remember I asked you pointedly. I said, well, they're making a lot of money doing that. Why don't they just continue that? And I remember you said, as soon as the Red Sea opens, somebody's going to break rate and go back to that.
And that was exactly what was lined up here now. And that's why you saw Maersk and Hapag, they were beginning to rapidly increase the number of services. Had Iran not happened, you would have seen the other carriers follow suit within the next 2 to 4 weeks.
It was really close, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Now, you said something very fascinating a few seconds ago, and you glossed over it a little bit. I am kind of picking up from you that you may not think this is necessarily a longer-term thing. You mentioned that this could maybe only permeate for the short term. What is your true thinking?
I'm genuinely concerned that this is going to be a long-term thing. That's the problem.
You are?
Yeah, I'm concerned this is really going to be a protracted affair. If we look at it, let me be completely undiplomatic here. What is the plan from the U.S. government? It seems the plan is let's go in, let's kill the leader and hope for the best. Yeah. And I'm not sure that's going to pan out very well, to put it mildly.
I, for one, thought maybe they would roll over. Maybe that was wishful thinking, but I think as the way the news flow is going, I think we've gotten into a really serious shooting war, and one that's going to permeate and have a incredible effect not only in container shipping, but I also happen to follow a little bit of the tankers as well on my own. I think that it's a royal.
I mean, to put it in perspective, the Iranian government is much stronger, has much more resources than you saw in, for example, Afghanistan and Iraq, and we saw how uncontainable those conflicts were.
So how do we phrase this? I mean, you work with your contacts at the highest level of executive contacts at the shipping community. At what point does this, let's call it temporary avoidance, become almost a semi-permanent structural network redesign? How does it play out over the next 3 months, 6 months?
Yeah, if we assume the worst and say the Hormuz Strait closure continues for weeks or months on end right now, The immediate result, that's what we're slowly beginning to see, is then cargo to the Gulf will be dumped wherever.
Right.
Then you will stop. You already see some carriers have ceased acceptance of cargo to the Gulf, so you stop loading on ships. The ships that are right now en route will all arrive within the next 3 to 4 weeks. After 3 to 4 weeks, then there is no more cargo coming in. Then, of course, there might be cargo being stuck at origin. There will be cargo stuck at these ports, but then that's basically it. Some of the flow here will then be redirected, because you will then take it all the way around Africa. If you go from, for example, Asia and you want to go into the Gulf, your choice is basically going to be you will sail all the way around Africa into the Mediterranean, cross the Suez, and then discharge over on the Red Sea coast of Saudi. That would be one option.
Right.
Or you could go up to Pakistan and then hope that you can be allowed through Iran by the Iranians, but that may or may not work. So there will be workarounds. They will be costly, which brings me to another point. If the Iranians really continue to do this blockage of the Hormuz Strait as effectively as they do now, there is very little chance this conflict will end, because energy prices will increase and there will be a pressure to try to stop that blockade. So it will only escalate the military conflict. Seen from the perspective of, let's say we were working for the Iranians and had to advise them.
Right.
We would like to have advised them to do exactly what they are doing now. Make this a much wider conflict regionally and make this extremely expensive for the entire world by oil prices going up.
Right. Let me ask you a question, because I think it's a friend of mine for the BCOs here. You know, I work with a lot of them, and I think one of the things that they're maybe not even forecasting or planning is, and I have to ask you this, and I'm kind of sad to say it, but could we potentially have rates the same level as COVID?
No, I think that would be unrealistic.
Okay, tell me why.
Because during COVID, we had globally, when it was worst, about 14% of the fleet unavailable because of congestion. We never reached that level even during the Red Sea crisis, and this is also not going to be the case.
Okay.
So we're not looking at a COVID-type situation in terms of supply and demand.
Okay. How can BCOs best plan right now? I mean, there is, you know, you're an expert. You're getting this information in real time, and you know, there's some questions. If you're a BCO now and you're ready to go to contract, you know, what is the thinking? What advice would you give a BCO?
What at least the advice I've been giving some of the BCOs is consider seriously and have a talk with the carriers to maybe move into some of these index-linked contracts. Because if you're contracting with the carrier, usually we go into a contract from the perspective, I want to agree on a rate so I know what the rate is, and I want to agree on volume so I know I can move my cargo. But as I hope everybody has learned over the last 6 months, when the market changes violently, either up or down, those contracts tend to go out the window.
Right.
If you go down the path of an index-linked contract, sure, your rates will still vary, but then you are sure of your volume. So from a supply chain manager perspective, you safeguard your physical part of it. Then you have the index-linked contracts, and that's where then the financial guys can take over, and they're going to shortly becoming some of these hedging instruments where you can then hedge off the risks. That would be the way to go. Focusing
a little bit on that comment on the index-linked contracts, do you feel, because I have a mixed emotions on it, do you feel that most organizations understand that whole process well? No, we have indexes for many years out there, but I think there is sometimes maybe a little bit of a lack of interest in understanding how do these indexes get created? What exactly do they measure? And let me exemplify that with 2 examples. We have the one that's the most well-known, which is the SCFI, the Shanghai Container Freight Index. Sure. It's the one that's been around since 2009. One of the newest ones is the NIFI index. And on the surface, it would be, well, they measure spot rates, so what's the big deal? Right. But if you look under the hood, the SCFI measures quotes. It has the advantage that you can come out with an index and say, right now, today, this is the price because this is what's being quoted. Right, right. But as we all know, a carrier might send out a quote. That's not the same thing as anybody booking cargo on that quote. And even if the shipper then books cargo on that quote, it might turn out the shipper doesn't show up because they got a better deal a week down the line. Right, right. And even if that is not the case, the market might have turned up so the carrier doesn't load the cargo. So where the NIFI goes the other way around, they only measure spot rates for cargo that has physically been loaded on board. Right. Which of course means you actually need to wait roughly 3 weeks, because from quote until the box is on the ship, you won't
typically takes
see
3
that,
weeks.
Right.
So they measure 2 slightly different things, and I think that is where I think the industry needs to be better at discerning what is actually being measured out there.
But they're not being utilized to a wide magnitude at this point, though.
Well, I was at an event in London last year where both Maersk and Hapag were present and were indicating that they have about 8 to 10% of their business on index-linked contracts.
Does that surprise you?
It was larger than I had thought, yes.
Me too. Yeah, I mean, I would have thought maybe 2 or 3%.
Yeah.
I'm surprised. That's pretty good.
It is.
But speaking of that, if you look at, again, I'm looking at it how we can give advice to BCOs, and one of the things I really wanted to know from you is isolating all the things that are going on. What is the most underpriced risk right now, you think, in container shipping?
The most underpriced risk is, again, these enormous geopolitical events we have out there. I mean, I think it was probably underpriced. I don't think anybody had realistically assumed we would see a full closure of the Strait of Hormuz. If that was the case, then we wouldn't be looking at a normalization through the Red Sea. And there might be other geopolitical events. Of course, we could point to, I was about to say, the obvious ones, being South China Sea, or it might be Taiwan. But what I'm more concerned are the ones we don't think about. We are in an increasingly fragmented world. So right. Small local conflicts. Let's take an example just from 25.
Venezuela?
No, war between Thailand and Cambodia. Two countries I think most people associate with travel and having a nice time.
Right.
I don't think anybody in the wildest dreams had seen a border war that closed the border, which disrupted a lot of the supply chain flows.
True.
And that, I think, is underappreciated by BCOs. It's a matter of looking into, not the entire world, but the specific countries you are engaged in, and try to look at what are some of the latent conflicts. It might not have flared up for decades, but what are the latent conflicts? Because they seem to be flaring up more often these days.
Yeah. Hold that thought for a second, because I want to come back to that. But I think I want to also focus a little bit on, obviously we've got our colleagues here in Los Angeles in America. A lot of our American friends are here at the show in Long Beach today at TPM. And I wanted to ask you about, with regards to the current conflict, the Iranian conflict, the shooting conflict, where will we see that risk show up first? Will it be rates, reliability, capacity? I think rates, obviously. Probably.
Yeah, I was about to say all of the above, basically, because it's going to show up in rates with added surcharges, and where it's also going to show up here immediately will be added fuel surcharges. I mean, with oil prices skyrocketing, rest assured the carriers will come out.
When do you think we'll see that?
Within a few days. It's going to be that rapid because oil prices are already shooting up.
Can you give me a quantum, what you think it could be?
I haven't verified it. That's based on some of the people we talked to at TPM, but apparently our carriers out already on $150 to $300 per 40-foot in emergency fuel surcharges.
Honestly, that's a little bit less than I would have assumed, but that could always change again.
It could always change again, but again, you would say that goes on trades that has nothing to do with the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. I mean, could there be some additional war risk surcharges?
That will very likely be the case. And again, given the nature of the conflict right now, you saw in the last 48 hours
yes.
a couple of attacks on a British airbase in Cyprus.
Right.
This is out in the Mediterranean. So you might see war risk surcharges suddenly appear in the Mediterranean as well.
Is there a chance that the capacity will be pulled, that line of capacity will be pulled just to keep the risks of insurance premiums and the ships in safer spots? Could we see a reduction in global capacity?
No, I don't think that.
Okay.
You're gonna see a rearrangement, but unlike the Red Sea where we had to go this massive detour, I was about to say the advantage with the Hormuz is there is no detour. You just don't go in there.
I want to go back to what you said before about the Cambodia and Thailand. Now, I lived in Taiwan for a number of years.
Yes.
And I think you probably know where I'm going to go with this question. China, Taiwan. Could you, if you would, could you rank the geopolitical risk of any issues with those potential conflicts?
Yeah, I mean, I would actually rank Taiwan risk level slightly below the South China Sea. Because if you look at the Chinese actions in the South China Sea over the last year, there's been plenty of clashes with, for example, the Filipino Navy.
Right.
And if you also look at it very single-mindedly, if you attack Taiwan, you've got to have a lot of ripples. Let's forget all the ripples for a second and just look at shipping. If you attack Taiwan, that means shipping lines would have to go around Taiwan. That's not really such a big detour, and it's certainly a lot less of a nuisance than going around Africa. But if I have a situation that prevents shipping from going through the South China Sea, that is an entirely different kettle of fish. That would be wildly problematic.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out, and I really love your opinion on it, is there any chance, though, that the Chinese are looking at the Iranian situation and saying, oh, that's really interesting how the U.S. reacted? Are they measuring us with how we reacted to that? Is there something that...
I definitely think they are, and you can say they should, because it's a matter of measuring response time. But I also think the Chinese are not stupid, so they will have looked at first the Russian debacle in Ukraine, which seemed like an easy invasion, now turned into a 4-year war so far. If we look at the Middle Eastern situation, this could also very well turn into a long-term debacle. I think a lot of these are probably teaching the Chinese what looks like an easy military conquest might not be. Now, here's my take on it. China might not necessarily want to attack Taiwan, but they definitely want us all to believe they're just about to do it, because that ties up a lot of military resources just to be on guard for that. Meanwhile,
yeah.
China can then spend their muscles elsewhere where there's nobody to oppose them.
Yeah. Well, Lars, then there's the wild card. What about Russia? How does Russia play into all this?
Russia have a slightly different view on, I can't remember if we talked about it last year as well, but I have this view: eventually Putin is not going to be on this earth anymore. We don't know whether it's tomorrow or 10 years, but at some point in time, he's not going to be there. And very likely that will cause chaos in Russia until somebody else grabs power. In that chaos, I would expect to see the Eastern Siberian republics declare themselves as an independent country.
Wow.
I mean, they are Asian. They have been sending a disproportionate amount of young men to the war in Ukraine to be lost there.
Right.
So they absolutely do not like the government in Moscow. So they could declare themselves independent. China would then likely come in and recognize that independence and then say, we will give you security guarantees, but then we need mining and oil rights.
Wow.
And then China will get naval bases on the Arctic Sea.
Before we launch into the next topic, I'd like to get your the barometer that you found in walking through TPM today. I guess it's a silly question, but what's the first thing that people are asking you about? This?
Middle East, absolute. Middle East is front and center.
Okay, well, let's jump to something else that is front and center and maybe not so significant anymore, but was a few days ago. Tariffs.
Yes.
Let's talk about the trade war, tariffs, and the State of the Union, and what Trump has done, what he hasn't done. Tariffs are back in political focus. Is this the rhetoric that exists moving the freight markets before policy does?
No, you can say I've seen a change. So let me start with, I mean, the question I most often get these days is, okay, so we got the new 10% tariffs and the IEPA is gone. What is the reaction to that? And my honest answer is we reach a point where, if I look around the rest of the world, nobody cares. And that requires a little bit of qualification. Because if you go back a year, especially to Liberation Day, everybody cared. They didn't like what the tariffs were. It was a matter of, okay, if my sourcing country now has 25% tariff and I can move over there with 15% tariff, I can rearrange my supply chains. Everybody cared because you could then rearrange the supply chain. And then the tariffs changed. And then they changed again and again and again, and with shorter and shorter and shorter deadlines, to the point where, and that already happened, I would say 3, 4, 5 months ago, where everybody came to the conclusion there is no point in changing your supply chain or changing your sourcing pattern because you can't make any meaningful plans. There's no point in making major investments in, for example, manufacturing in the US, because if I do that, it's typically a 10-year planning horizon, and I can't predict what the trade landscape is going to be. So everybody adjusted to say, fine, whatever supply chain we have, that's what we're going with. We will continue business as usual, navigate a little bit tactically if that's required. And that's why I say when we see the new tariffs came in now, nobody cares because they've already assumed this is going to be wildly unstable. I then usually ask a rhetorical question. Let me do it with you as well.
Okay.
Let us assume Mr. Trump comes out tonight and he says, I will now not change any tariffs or any trade policy whatsoever. It is stable. How long do you want to see a stable regime before you believe it?
Well, you would like to see it for, 3 months, 6 months.
Everybody I talk to just say, well, at least 3 years, at least. Because there's been created an environment, and that is especially true when I go outside of the US, where there is zero faith in stability, which means they're not going to change anything.
Right, but I mean, I would have said 30 days because, he seems to, and again, I'm going to stay out of the political arena here, but I mean, I think that, we need some stability, but it actually launches into the question about the BCOs. And, the question I had a month ago for you was, should the BCOs be front loading now? But does it even matter?
No, I mean, there was a brief moment here when the IEPA tariffs were slapped down, where it was clearly a thought with many BCOs. Now is the time to front load, but that very, very quickly fizzled out. Again, because we have seen cases in recent months where, yes, now there is an opportunity,
Right.
but then there's a new tariff. Some of these tariffs were introduced with a deadline of -7 days. So it is a risky affair to front load because you have no assurances that what you front load isn't suddenly then slapped with a new tariff before it arrives.
Lars, he's a friend of mine. He's a friend of mine, and I think maybe a friend of yours. You know Pete Mento, of course.
Mhm.
You know Pete, and Pete's talking on LinkedIn about the tariffs and the refunds. He's a smart guy.
Oh, yes.
A very smart guy. And when I read it about the refunds,
It's going to take years.
it's way over my head. I don't get it. I mean, it's going to take years. So it's a very complex system.
Yes.
So we've got complexity on the tariffs. We've got geopolitical instability. We've got a shooting war. Is there anything good on the ship?
Yes.
Tell me.
Let me look at it from a different perspective. If you look at container trade growth, I mean, last year was also wildly unpredictable.
Mhm.
Global containerized growth outside of the US was 7%. Global container growth for the US was -4 to -5%. So what I've seen is a world that actually values some element of predictability. What I have seen very, very clearly, you see it at the state level, where there are more and more trade agreements being agreed between states bilaterally, not including the US.
Right.
And I've seen companies increasingly focus, if I'm a manufacturer somewhere, if I export to the US, I will do whatever it takes to maintain that business. It's good business.
Right.
But if I'm a manufacturer and I want to grow my business, I'm looking for where should I expand sales. Almost nobody is pointing to the US because it's too unstable, too unpredictable. So they focus their efforts on how do you build up more trade relations. That is already happening. That's what has been driving the rest of the world is doing phenomenally well.
So we're being de-emphasized.
Yes. That's the logical consequence of the trade policy that's been led.
But on the flip side, could that actually be a plus for U.S. manufacturing? In other words, could we increase our manufacturing because we're starting to lose the focus or the requirement or the sucker of the...
I have a hard time seeing that because if you want to increase manufacturing, if it's because it's for domestic consumption,
Right.
that manufacturing still needs to be cheaper than producing it abroad and paying tariffs, and that is still not the case. Second is, even if it then is the case, that was my point from before, and I have spoken to also foreign companies say, well, we are looking into, should we move manufacturing to the US? I mean, it's free of charge to look into,
Right.
and what they typically find is, sure, if the tariffs you have right now stays for the next 10 years, then this is a good idea, but because you have no idea what the tariffs will be a week, a month, a year from now, this makes it an extremely risky investment, so it doesn't happen.
Right. Lars, what is your internal reaction think that will happen with the tariffs? Say 6 months from now, 1 year from now, if you and I have our
Yeah.
talk again in 2027.
I think it's going to be just as unstable. We're going to have exactly the same conversation. IEPA was slapped down. That meant that there are now the new Section 122 tariffs. They only run for 150 days.
150.
Then something else needs to come in place. There's a bunch of Section 301s that are now being launched. Some of that will have to go through Congress. So we're going to see constant changes again.
Can that 150 day be rolled over to a new 150 day?
That is not my understanding, but I'm not a legal expert
Okay.
on that one.
Let's move on to, I think, another topic that's really fascinating for me. I'm just going to be blunt with you. I'll just ask you like this. It's just, I didn't think about asking it this way before. But is the Hapag-Zim merger in any kind of danger because of what's happening?
No, I don't see that. Actually, I see that as a very, very clever way of solving a problem.
Tell us about that.
Because prior to this, I mean, SIM was up for sale, and I was also being very public and saying, I don't see any carrier in their right mind buying SIM, because the problem was the golden share and the influence the Israeli government has through the golden share. And then they come up with this very clever construction where you take a tiny part of SIM with the golden share, with some of the Israeli vessels, park that in a completely separate Israeli-owned company,
Right.
and then you take the 80-85% of SIM that has nothing to do with Israel and parks it over in Hapag-Lloyd. I think it's a very nice construction. I think it's a wonderful deal made by Hapag-Lloyd. It's definitely going to strengthen them.
Do you think that customers, BCOs in America, will see any new synergies from that alliance? And if so, what will the main synergies be?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I would point to synergies. I would rather point to another one, because every time you have acquisitions, the question is always, can you hold on to the customers of the acquired company? And Hapag-Lloyd has a very, very good track record. They've been buying numerous container lines over the last decade.
Sure.
And every time they've been able to retain almost all the customers. So they really have a skill in terms of retaining what they buy.
And that's headed up by Rolf Jebsen at Hapag?
Rolf Jensen, yes.
Yeah. And he's also Danish, I believe, right?
No.
Oh, no?
Now he is probably gonna slap me over the head because I can't remember.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. I don't want to say where it's
not Danish.
I can't remember where it's from. But if you, as I said, you're sitting down with these customers, and the BCOs have a lot of questions. They're coming to the hallways specifically about the Iranian crisis.
Yes.
But aside from that, if you're advising them in a closed room, you get through that Iranian crisis. What is the one structural move that you would advise customers to do right now? I think that's going to be a really important takeaway for your Lars lunch. And tell me about that.
That's the one we actually already talked about. Try to look seriously at what index-linked contracts can do for you.
The index-linked contracts is your real solution to this.
It's a partial solution. It's a very good tool, because yes, we can still sign the good old contracts, and we all know, we have known it for years, for decades, that when the market changes drastically, those contracts go out the window. If the rates go up, the carriers will slap more surcharges anyway. If the rates tank, the shippers will go elsewhere. So we still try to retain the illusion that we can make a fixed rate deal, and that deal will be honored no matter what. But all experience shows that is not the case. And for many shippers, the most important thing is that their cargo moves. Because if it doesn't move, then your product is not on the shelves and you don't sell anything. So it's the physical part of the supply chain that's most important. The index-linked contract basically guarantees the cargo moves. Then you have the volatility on the price, absolutely. That can then be dealt with separately.
But Lars, isn't it a little bit counterintuitive for most of the BCOs, especially the mid-tier ones, to be even thinking about that?
It's only counterintuitive if the starting point is a belief that a fixed rate contract means a fixed rate. But as I mentioned, that is not the case. Just look at the last 6 years.
Oh, absolutely. Totally agree with you. Some of them go out the window. So how do they get started? How do BCOs get started?
There are several ways. Either you need to get started by familiarizing yourself with what are the pros and cons of the different indices. I did a study that's actually a number of years ago where I did go to a number of BCOs and say, okay, if you are at least looking at indices, not necessarily index-linked contract, but just looking at them, which one do you choose? And then they would answer that. Then I asked them, why? Why are you using this one? Because that's the one we know, which from an analytical perspective is not very comforting. What you really should do is you should look at the different indices. Then you should look at what is my specific trade lane exposure. What have I been paying, say, over the last 2 to 3 years? Which index tracks best what I am seeing? Because that's what you want. You want the comfort that you have an index that is credible and tracks what you are seeing.
From your understanding or your take, and I don't know how much of an opinion you'd have on this, within, say, a typical BCO organization, like a massive retailer, are the decisions on index-linked contracts always in the logistics suite, or they move over to the finance suite?
Yeah, the interesting thing is, going down this path, the best way is to begin to bring in the finance team, because those are the guys that typically goes to the logistics guys. We want a number for the budget. And then the logistics manager says, well, it's going to be all over the place, and the finance, we need a number for the budget. This is a way of being more constructive in that discussion and say, look, we can do this, then it is a known index. Then you, dear Mr. Finance Manager, you're probably already hedging off the interest rate risk our company has, or the currency risk that we have. Those are well-known tools.
Right.
You can do the same with the freight.
I'm sitting here, and I just decided something. I already got our next business venture. So let's go on a road trip, you and I. We'll go to Chicago, New York, LA, Houston, Miami, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco. We'll have a seminar. I'll tell them how to get refunds. They can use the refund money to put towards fixed link contracts, and you and I can, make hay. Deal?
Then we need to expand the trip. Then you come with me and my camper van through Africa, and we sell the same concept there.
That, my friend, might be a problem. Lars, it was great to see you.
A pleasure as always.
Seeing you. Ladies and gentlemen, Lars Jensen, Vespucci Maritime, my friend, and the oracle of container shipping. Thank you, Lars.
My pleasure.
Okay.